All right. I am super excited to have this conversation because it's been a while since we've talked live,
Yes.
but we go back quite a bit to 2015, I believe, was the original raise of one of the prior iterations of what is now Zero Hash.
Yes. Yes. 2015. 10 plus years.
So I want to kick things off with a question that if I ever wind up getting this question on Jeopardy, it'll be all thanks to you. Tell me about the Onion Futures Act and what it has to do with the origin story of you getting into this space.
Yes. So the first business that I founded that you invested in, that actually you are our first ever investor, ever. So the first outside money I ever took was from you, and learned a lot from those interactions. I vividly remember being in San Francisco and trying to negotiate with you over 0.25 of a pre-money, and I think our pre-money was like $5 million. And like, it's one, crazy to see how those pre-monies have changed, but two,
Right.
you made a very good point, which is like, Edward, it makes no difference to you. And it's so funny. Like if I had negotiated that point, I actually think we probably would have, we wouldn't. I don't think there were other investors coming in. So it's interesting. You think it's just an interesting lesson that it's kind of those sliding door moments for 0.25 of $1 million, which has no impact in the grand scheme of things. Would I have walked away? And I'm glad that we really didn't. And you helped guide in a way that probably I came at that a little bit too confrontational. I was green in that. And you kind of coached and you said, look, this is why you should take this. And very logically so. But yes, so the first business was an alternative commodities platform. And I just became very interested in markets where there's these kind of weird frictions where people have self-selected out, either because of a regulatory reason. So, for example, in the United States, it's actually, for now, illegal to have an onions future, where you can pretty much a future on anything at this point, right? Especially when you're looking at prediction markets. Just to think about 10 years ago when we were talking about the CFTC, that was very, very niche. Now, CFTC is a mainstream term. It's on the news. It's on 60 Minutes. But still, the Kalshi, Polymarket, CME cannot list a future explicitly on onions. And that was because of some niche rule that was written, I think 60, 70 years ago now.
A couple of
That
guys had cornered the market, right?
exactly. A couple of people cornered the market, and the onion lobby effectively stated that, futures created this opposite effect, which is weird because why just onions? But yeah, it just shows how powerful the onion lobby was at the time. And they created a law specifically around this point.
The idea that there's an onion lobby in and of itself is quite hilarious. But it does show a window into how you come at your entrepreneurial approach, which is a little different. And if I think back to your schooling and study of these markets, you pursued a master's in finance. You didn't go through the sort of typical like banking consulting position, then get an MBA. How did that somewhat academic approach to studying these markets serve you well? And in what ways did it maybe become a hindrance, or were there things that you had to learn by coming through that path?
Yeah. So I think, so one is, I think if you go to a place like MIT, you don't reconsider what you want to do. You've done it wrong. And partly, the stamp of approval gives you way more credibility than probably we should have had in hindsight, right? But that's, you're investing in people with that. And, we didn't make you a ton of money, but we made you a little bit of money, right? We weren't a VC return. We weren't returning the fund, but we made a little bit of money for everybody, and that was okay. I think it was maybe a general point, maybe not just because we had studied the markets, but maybe it was just kind of where we were in our journey of, being, or my journey of being a founder. I probably hyperfixated, I think it's more of a function of a regulatory market. You hyperfixate on getting the license. Get licensed, I will be successful. And that becomes the entire business. And then you get to the start line, you're like, wow, okay, we're probably 10 years too early for this product. And so it's probably more a function of the challenges of building in the financial services space as a startup, as opposed to more pure play, just coming at this from an academic perspective. But that experience actually made me found ZeroHash, which was I want to allow people to innovate more quickly, having gone through a process where I took 2 years. You go through that all and really made the mistake probably that thinking that regulation was a sufficient condition for success. It was really just a necessary condition for success. So as I've pivoted to ZeroHash, it was really about allowing people to innovate more quickly with a necessary condition. But ZeroHash doesn't make people successful. We allow people to become successful more easily, and that was probably the biggest learning. Was more of a fintech approach as opposed to a pure play academic approach.
And I think I would actually extend that out to people come out and do healthcare products and get FDA approval and spin compounds out of places or you know uh, health biomedical devices and stuff like that, where like you obviously can't sell a biomedical device
Yep.
to a market without getting that FDA approval. But
Mhm.
then you still, once you have it, need to
Yep.
go through all of the GTM and, hire a team and plug dollars into marketing and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think there's one which is definitely challenging with a regulated market because there is this friction, whether it be finance or healthcare or something else. But I also maybe just think it's a way of, before we started recording, we're talking about books, and I think maybe it's just a sequencing mindset of people. It's like as humans, we hyperfixate. Like you, I'm going to get the book out. But then there's all these other things that have to happen once the book is published. I'm going to write the book, and that's the mountain that you've got to climb. But actually, there's all these other mountains that come afterwards. It's a sequence of mountains, and sometimes you become so focused on the mountain ahead of you that, in theory, maybe you should have had someone else start climbing the mountain a few mountains ahead, or start to sequence that. And that's what's challenging in a startup because you have all these trade-off discussions. But realizing that there's many other mountains coming down the line is an important one.
So you've climbed a bunch of mountains in this process,
Mhm.
both the various formations of this company, but even within Zero Hash, a couple of different business models and pivots, and even to the point where very publicly you've discussed how you were almost a week away from running out of capital at one point. There's a lot of mountain climbing. How would you advise founders to evaluate the difference between stubbornness and useful persistence?
I think it's very, very hard to distinguish. I mean, look, I think the distinction is stubbornness is that you aren't like, I would say persistence is just that you're moving forward. Stubbornness is that you're moving forward in a certain direction. And that's the difference. And so I just kept moving forward, but I was willing to go left, right, maybe take another right turn, maybe even go backwards. It's like even take a very big detour. Whereas stubbornness is maybe you've almost got blinkers on. That's maybe the way I would describe it. That founders, you should be persistent, but not stubborn. It's kind of this dichotomy that being a founder is both the most humbling experience of your life, but it's the most amount of confidence, I think, in your life. It's the same, it's the dichotomy that you've got to be incredibly persistent, but you've also got to be incredibly flexible. And I think that's probably one of the big things that I see in younger founders in particular, where I've started to do some angel investing, especially in regulated markets. And I saw this about myself is sometimes you become so stubborn, and I'm just not clear. I think at times I was incredibly stubborn, not persistent. I think at times that stubbornness could manifest itself in that you believe everything's a fight, and everything's a zero sum. And I think that's a very real natural human reaction that when you feel under attack, everything's an attack. And it's important to realize that one, there can be accretive value. It's not zero sum. Hey, Charlie wins and I lose. We can both win. And I think that was kind of the point that you made to me very early on in our interactions was, hey, we can both win. And that was, a more, and there were other mechanisms that, hey, we can all win. But that can sometimes happen. You kind of get foxhole mentality and you become incredibly stubborn and you're not listening and almost everything's a zero sum fight. And then every interaction becomes like that. And, that's what I see in sometimes younger founders. I definitely, in hindsight, see that about myself. And so I'd say now I'm much better at being incredibly persistent without being incredibly stubborn.
It feels like you've had a lot of learnings on this journey, and I'm wondering if I'm hearing coaching or advice that you've gotten, or what are the mechanisms that you've used to develop and learn as a founder?
Yeah. So look, I've done some coaching. I found it helpful to some degree in places. I think honestly, having other founders that you can be incredibly open with has been helpful. I've mentioned like Tom Sosnoff, he's, 30 years older than me. And just it's somebody that I mean, it's kind of an interesting mentorship relationship. He never tells me what to do. He's just like, you should think about this, or I really don't think. And it's never like, if you don't do that, we're not like, it's a relationship of equals, despite him being way more successful and way more knowledgeable. And that's been incredibly helpful. Honestly, for me, and my wife laughs at this when I say this, but for me, I am introverted and I like to think. And it's very, very hard in this, especially as a founder, but just I think just in general right now, to actually have mental time to think. And for me, some people like to meditate. For me, it's to get a 90-minute massage once a week. And that for me allows me to process. It's not even the massage. For me, it just allows me 90 minutes without my phone. I'm just in my own head. And some people walk. I know that you bike, and there's things that people do, but like it's literally like even when I bike, I have my phone. It's like I literally cannot look at my phone. If I have a thought, I can't type the thought out. And what that allows me to do is just allows me almost to process the emotions and process things and to come with different ideas. So for me, it's about creating that very, very, very intentional space for me just to think and be like, I probably didn't handle that as well as I should have. I should probably message that person, or, hey, I probably should have done this differently, or, hey, you know what? I think I handled that perfectly. What can I learn about next time? So for me, whether it be meditation, biking, intense sport, that's not for me. I love it, but it doesn't give me that same mental space, just like complete freedom to be in my own thoughts and just to process things a little bit more clearly.
It sounds like there's a massage therapist that maybe deserves an equity grant.
I mean, I pay for all this myself. I mean, it's definitely not cheap, but
The ROI on that sounds very high.
for me, it's been very high for business. It's also, frankly, been very high ROI for me as a person. And I think partly, and partly, I think, you were, when I had to call you up and say, hey, look, this isn't gonna be a return of the fund. We might not even be able to make X percent. This may be like, we've lost you a lot of money. It's kind of, in that moment, it can be soul crushing, but you have to differentiate yourself. It doesn't mean that you don't care, but you've got to differentiate your whole identity away from the business. And I've kind
Right.
of I've gone through multiple iterations, in particular with ZeroHash, where it was a much bigger, much more successful business than the first business, which was Seed. And you're saying goodbye to something that is, that you put a lot of time in, a lot of effort, and you have to say goodbye. And if you associate your entire being as the company, that is very, very difficult. So for me, being able to separate some of this and being able to process emotions and carry the negativity and like, look, building business is really, really hard. Like, honestly, if I have an easy day at work, I'm like, what have I missed? What have I missed? If you take that home, it's not good for your friendships, relationships. I wouldn't be with my wife. I wouldn't have my kid. Like, there's so many other things. So you've got to, like, I live and breathe this, but you also have to be able to switch it off.
Right.
An hour a day, 30 minutes a day, something. And that amount of time differs, I think, over time periods with people, differs per person. But I think you just need that a little bit of healthy distance sometimes.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I had another VC ask me how I sort of maintain balance in the face of like responsibility
Yeah.
over other people's money. And I thought about it, and my answer was that I hold out the possibility that I might not be good at this. And I think too often what winds up happening is as a VC, right, people put investors on pedestals because the VC presence sells the tickets to the startup conference, right? And so you get announced everywhere you go as, oh, we have this panel of top VCs or this panel of super successful judges, right? And then you also have to pitch too, right? And a little bit different than startup. The startup, you can say, look at my great business, it's working. But when you're pitching a blind pool, you're pitching yourself. And you're basically saying, like, put LP capital into my fund because I'm good at this. And it gets tied up in your identity. And so when you start to get data back that says you might not be good at this, it messes with your sense of self. Right.
Hmm.
If I am not a good VC, what am I? Who am I as a person?
Hmm.
And I just always pull it back to like, I'm a person who tries really hard, who spends a lot of time thinking about it. But there's some level of like, I can't control the outcomes that
Hmm.
is grounding. So I can, I am more than just a good VC, right? I'm somebody who tries really hard to be a good VC, and I might try hard at being other things. I am currently trying hard to be a good author and book marketer.
Exactly. And that is healthy, I think.
For sure. For sure. Let's talk about the other types of support that you've had, especially if you built out the company beyond the founding team. Are there key hires that you made early, either just because you got a certain role or certain people in those roles performed above and beyond, or even hires that like once you made them, you realized like, I actually should have done this far earlier. What have been the most important people you've surrounded yourself in the company to enable your success?
Yeah. So we actually have the defining concept of a founding team at this company. And it's something that I'm particularly proud of because I'm the founder, but there's people here that have lived through all of that journey. And no matter like people that joined 3 months after the company was incepted, and so I'm very proud that we have a founding team that represents the cultural values of what a founder is. And that's been incredibly helpful. And these people are at all levels of the org. Some are C-suite, some are ICs, but they're still founders. They're still founder mentality. I would say the biggest thing for me, the biggest unlock, I would say maybe it's hard to know say titles or roles, but for me, bringing in a chief of staff 18 months ago has been an incredible uplift for me. Now, why is that individual being incredibly uplifting for me? They actually they accelerate my strengths. They also temper some of my weaknesses. They're able to carry the pace that I have. I don't think I'm always the easiest person to work with. Like do things very, very intensely, right? Like I literally work 7 days a week at different I still have a weekend, but I work 7 days a week. And so being very transparent, having somebody who's incredibly high EQ in that role has been incredible for me. And it gives me the flex to just do more. And it's been like, I feel like I'm operating, it's almost like having, and then now my chief of staff has built out AI agents of himself. So it's almost like, there is just a reality that in companies, not every person is equal in terms of output or strategic value. It's just not. And if you're the founder, there should be a way outweighted impact that you have. That's how you're compensated, frankly. And so if you're able to multiply that impact, then what it can do to the business, I think is incredibly powerful away from without seeming like an egomaniac. But there is just that reality. I would say the big thing I've learned about recruiting more generally, whether it be mistakes or things, is especially for us in a remote first company, and I think more and more companies are building a remote first, is you've got to go super, super deep for 60 to 90 days, almost painfully deep in terms of the amount of training and coaching and education and feedback. And then if it doesn't feel right after 90 days, it's just not right. But you've really got to lean in and then you've got to lean out. You've either got to let the person swim, or, you've got to kind of take them out of the game. And that's probably been a big learning for me. And being incredibly painfully just involved in that first 90 days, I think is absolutely critical.
And is that what is survival rate of that intense 90 days? Would you gauge that like it's working or not working based on a certain amount of people who make it, or is there an intentional failure rate out of that process?
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's something that we've rolled out more recently. I would say this is that we probably operate a little bit differently. And this is actually, I mentioned Tom. He actually operates differently, but he respects our approach. Like last year and the year before, we had, we let go of 12% of the company each year. That's kind of, some people view that kind of like the Citadel approach. It's just not. It's just like you naturally will not get 100% of hiring right. So for me, success is actually lowering that number of effectively letting people go. If we can get that down to 12% to 5%, that's been a win, because the impact is not fair on the people that have joined you. They're not successful. And secondly, it's not the business. It just stalls out the business because you've got somebody that's, not operating at the right level of where you need to be. So that for me is the metric. I don't think we're there yet, but that's probably been a that's probably the metric of success for me.
Cool. Let's talk about the market that you're participating in. The crypto market has gone through a bunch of up and downs, finding itself, and lots of predictions of booms and busts. Do you have a sense of what has enabled you and the company to be stable and continue to be successful through various sort of mini cycles within this market?
One is trying to take a long-term view. Two is just fundamentally truly believe in this technology. And that sometimes sounds odd to people, but really believing that this was a technology that could create additive value for people. And there's just a lot of magpie effects when something is really interesting. There's all these secondary and third order impacts. And you're going to see this in AI. There's going to be a lot of AI businesses that go to zero. You've seen it with the web. Fundamentally revolutionary technology creates massive, it's just basic economics, and creates massive potential for profits. And so lots of people are going to jump in. And so fundamentally, it's been that, and it's been trying to maintain a healthy level of perspective and being nimble, but being persistent. So look, it hasn't been a straight line for us as a business. When it got incredibly challenging 3 years ago, when the SEC was effectively claiming that every token was a security, we had to pivot in the sense of we had to add additional businesses into our business line. We weren't a payment business 4 years ago. Now 70% of our revenue comes from payments. And so again, it was really taken away. The idea was about the technology. It was never around Bitcoin or ETH or any meme coin. It was always about the technology. And so that's been the commonality, and that's been the commonality of the thread, and really understanding what motivates the business and being kind of high level about that. And then being flexible and nimble has been incredibly helpful. Also just doing things the right way. If it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. If you're going to take shortcuts that will impact you, don't do them. And we're just I just have a zero tolerance for shortcuts that just will harm people. It's just no, that's not what we're doing. And that has allowed us, it actually helps us in a B2B construct, because people look at us and they say, you didn't take the shortcuts when it got really tough. We trust you. And that has helped build us a huge amount of credibility and trust. And ultimately, the B2B infrastructure that we service, it's all about trust. It's all about trust. And so we've been able to prove ourselves. I didn't know that at the time, but that was the key.
I think that's actually also something that is perhaps somewhat inherent to financial technology as well. There are a whole bunch of businesses that, looked like various types of tech-powered lenders, and essentially they wound up getting thrown around by various interest rate cycles and all of this sort of stuff. But fundamental underlying technology advantage, and were really actually tech businesses, and they had something core that they were offering, have been able to weather those cycles versus bouncing around based on whatever rates we're doing or whatever the product du jour was, or whatever, that they're real underlying technology businesses. One last question before I let you go. What would you have told your 2015 self, particularly in the vein of what you would need to learn over time as you sort of transition from somebody who was starting something to now somebody who is running something that is quite large and lots of people and complexity?
I mean, I think the biggest learning for me has been that persistence versus stubbornness distinction. I think probably not trying to people please and being clear on what you are and what you're not. Right? I'm very comfortable now. And maybe that comes with confidence. And maybe that's just something that you can't tell your earlier self. But having that confidence to say, this is what we are. And this is what we're not. And I think, honestly, most of the time, that works a lot better. People don't like the ambiguity. I mean, I just had a conversation with a team today. I said, look, this is what we're doing. I welcome some feedback. But equally, not all of you are going to like the end decision. And that's okay. And I think probably that come with confidence, or just, but build something that you want to live and breathe, and explain that that's what you're building. And I think the ambiguity, there's enough ambiguities with startups. There's enough risks with startups. I think you've got to be clear. I think what I tell myself is know what you want to be ambiguous on, i.e. where we're going, but with a common, we're not unambiguous that this is a technology. And then also know what risks you're taking as well. Hey, I'm going to de-risk everything over here, but because I'm taking a massive swing over here. So those would be my core elements. Startups are just this massive set of contradictions. And I think it's not contradictory if you're just very clear on what you are and what you're not in certain situations.
And I think that goes doubly so for the fundraising process, especially in the early stage, because it is very easy to go talk to 30, 40, 50 people, many of whom have very differing opinions about what you should be and what you could be. And if you get pulled around by that, you're pitch is going to be definitively worse or sound, muddled versus deciding what it is that you are and saying, hey, if 3 out of 50 agree strongly that this is what I should be, I'm going to get checks from those three versus, you know, uh, a bunch of time wasted across the 47.
Agreed. It's almost like, hey, 50 VCs or 50, you may even to your customers, you may be 5 out of 10 on all of these, but none of them are buyers, right? It's like building a business. You got to know what you're going to be exceptional on at. And then there's going to be things that you may say no to or just not do. It's the same thing with the VCs. It's like saying no to them before they say no to you, I think is really, really, really important. But that comes with confidence, I think. That does come with confidence.
Well, your confidence to this point is well earned, and I definitely congratulate you on getting the business to this point. And it's fun to watch your continued success. And I appreciate you making the time.
Yeah. Thank you, Charlie, and learned a lot from you. So appreciate it.
Definitely.